Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good day. My name is Tony Zockwitz, the messenger, and I pray peace to you, your family, friends, and all that you come in contact with. Amen. So on the line is the co-host, Bryan Mercier, and we're just talking a little bit about what he just did today. He shared a little bit about, Bryan, can you share that again? That was interesting. About the
Sure, I was just saying how I did a retreat on Friday, and I had another retreat on Sunday, a confirmation retreat, and I did also a Bible study this weekend as well. The confirmation retreat had almost about 60 teens, and it was a 7-hour retreat, and we talked about the existence of God and faith and Jesus and the miracles he worked. Then we talked about the story of salvation and how Jesus came to save us and how we can't get to heaven by accident. We're not just going to wake up and get there by doing nothing, and that we actually have to have a relationship with Jesus. We actually have to choose heaven. It has to be our goal. You know, if heaven's not our goal, then we're probably not going to make it. So I was really challenging the kids, not just to sit on the couch and, say they're Catholic, but to actually live their Catholic faith, to make it part of them,
right.
To really change the world.
Yeah, now you mentioned a couple of them that was self-claimed atheists or something. What happened with them?
Well, I talked to a lot of atheists, and I always challenge them about why they believe in God, or I should say why they don't believe in God. And in fact, in this particular retreat, I asked the kids before the retreat, how many people believe in God? Some hands went up. I said, how many people don't believe in God? Some hands went up. And then I said, how many are not sure? You're somewhere in the middle. And by far and away, the majority of the hands went up at that point. And, so I started trying to find the kids who believed in God to ask them, hey, why do you believe in God? And a lot of the kids just said, I don't, or I'm not sure. And so finally I came out with it. I said, listen, does anyone in this room believe in God? And about only 3 hands, maybe 4 hands went up at the most. And this is what I deal with up here in New England, And so I try to challenge them in their faith, but a lot of kids have told me that they believe in God now because of, the talks that I've had with them, because of my retreats, because of the information that I give. And, we're bringing a lot of kids back to God and back to their faith, so it's great.
Hey, did you give them, written material to bring home?
I gave them a pamphlet on how to pray, because a lot of kids wanted to come closer to God, but they don't know how. No one ever teaches them how to pray. And so I wrote up a little pamphlet, very short, but it teaches them how to pray, the different ways of praying, how to enter into God's presence, and I gave them a rosary to take home, too, and keep by their bedside.
That's beautiful. Good for you. Yeah, that's interesting. And it brings up the topic, and it's because I've got one of my daughters that's agnostic, if not atheist, at the worst case. She was turned off at Quinnipiac. Some time back, the Muslims took over Quinnipiac. I don't know if you're aware of this. And they had made it mandatory for them to take a religious course, which was Muslim, and she walked out of there with no faith.
Wow.
She was destroyed. God help those that, destroy the children. Yeah, so she's kind of adamant about that, But I'm a Saint Monica. I keep praying, so hopefully we'll have some type of conversion along the way.
Yeah, if you're Catholic, you should definitely get a book on it, which is called "Why Do You Believe in God?" And that will answer all of her questions on God, on faith, on the Bible, on Jesus, and even some Muslim objections too are answered in that book. So it would really, really help her faith. Extremely.
I don't know if she'd read it. I mean, she's like hostile. I mean, really? Extremely. Oh yeah. When the election was won by Donald, she freaked out. I mean, she to the max. It was really demonic, in a way. really demonic. She attacked my wife, me, the whole 9 years. I mean, we still love her to death. We're not going to give up on that, you know. But it was like, what? Where does this come from? And we know where it comes from. Satan is alive. He's doing quite well. He's trying to destroy the families. Because if you destroy the families, what do? You destroy the church. Because church is family. Yes, the family of God, both physically with kids and, you know, mom and dad, and even single people and everything. But it's the whole unity of the body of Christ. So, which brings up a topic, as I had mentioned to you before, what was on my mind was the idea of life after death. Now, there's two ways to look at it. The actual death, where you die, you don't come back, and then the experiences that several people have, including myself, where you go into a state. Some actually see heaven. They experience purgatory and hell. And then they come back. And my mother was one of those. My mother went to the extent of the tunnel. You know, where you see the light in the tunnel?
Right.
And because she had a hysterectomy years ago.
Uh-huh.
And she was in the tunnel. She was heading for the light. And I'll explain what that is, too, by the way. And she kept hearing, Mommy, don't leave us, we need you. And Jesus stood in front of her and says, your kids need you got to go back. And it was my sister crying that out. So when she wound up actually in the nursing home, and she was having issues with her legs swelling and all that, and she was basically ready to go home, you know, to heaven. That night before she passed, I went into prayer and says, you know, Lord, it's not right that, you know, you gave her this experience of going through the tunnel, seeing the light, and I says, now you're going to keep her in a home for how long? And let her suffer? I says, you know, that's not right. And so she was taken by divine mercy the next day. And that's beautiful. And she did share with my brother, she saw the Blessed Mother all in light, all in white, you know, like a bright light. And then she saw streaks of light. Now, here's the thing about the tunnel. So I had a Carmelite sister pass away just recently. So the Carmelites go there, and she had other ministries that she was involved with the church. So the priest, as the casket was coming into the church, the presiding priest, and it just happened to be my cousin was there, who's a deacon. You know, unbeknown to me, I didn't know that was his church. So he calls out, he says, all those that were in ministries with Dolores, please line up along the aisle, you know, when the casket comes by. And I had a vision the night before about the tunnel and the light. So here we are standing on one side, and these other people are standing on the opposite side. And what do you think is in front of the altar but the candle? You see where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
Because how many times have you heard when you die, that people say, oh, I go through the tunnel and people are greeting me, you know, my loved ones, and I recognize them, and blah, 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 blah. Well, here I am in church, and guess what? What's on the opposite side of that the candle in church is the altar. What does the altar represent? A piece of heaven. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got the people lined up, you got the candle in front of you, and you got heaven on the altar. Because it's a holy place. That's where the sacrifice is. That's where the host turns into the body and the blood of Jesus Christ. So,
right, and the Mass is a microcosm of heaven, as we know.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I'm going to have you answer this question as I pose it to you. So Jesus died, and then what happened? Why is it that people thought the apostles stole the body? So what do you think happened there? Why they put that out there?
Well, there were a lot of reasons. Mostly, though, that Jesus was a pain in the neck to the Jewish leaders. That's no secret. The Jewish leaders abhorred him. They were envious of him, and this untrained rabbi just kept defeating them, and they couldn't get him, so they had to crucify him. And they finally got rid of him and got him out of the way. But then all of a sudden, people have been talking about a resurrection. And if that happens, well, the problem in the state is going to be worse than the first. And so when Jesus rose from the dead, I mean, what other explanation do they have? They can't let this Jesus guy come back because that's going to undo everything they worked so hard to do to get rid of him. And so they concocted this story. Well, they concocted a couple stories, but one of them was the one that you just said. What did you just say?
No, about what happened to him. But when Pontius Pilate, now here's the thing because I'm a detail guy, right?
Correct.
So Pontius Pilate, we know that he knew about the resurrection because the Sadducees and the Pharisees told him about it. So they said, you got to post the guard, right? Remember
Correct.
They rolled the stone? They also put his seal on the stone. They sealed the tomb. You see where I'm getting with this?
Correct.
And then it was reported back that the seal was broken, the tomb was open, and body disappeared. So what did they say next? They spread a rumor.
Right, that the apostles came and stole the body, which absolutely would have been impossible. For one, the tomb was sealed, as you said. They could have broken it open probably, but there were Roman guards stationed there. And Roman guards, well, the story says the Jewish people said that, they fell asleep. Of course, the penalty for falling asleep is death. And so no Roman guard is going to fall asleep if he values his life at all. And much less the whole group. So, some people say that, well, they stole the body. Well, other people say it's even like atheists will say they threw his body into a pit in the dogs, and let the dogs eat it, and he never got buried in the first place. But the bottom line is we have all of these eyewitnesses who saw Jesus rise from the dead, number one. He appeared to many different people, and the apostles had no good reason for inventing that story. The only reason you invent a story, or in other words, you lie, is for gain in some way. For example, if they said that Jesus rose from the dead and we're right, they would be looking to get lots of popularity, or they would be looking to get fame or women or money. There would be some reason why they would need to lie. There would be some goal that they were trying to achieve. But all the apostles achieved was getting tortured, was getting killed for their faith. Some of them were exiled. Really, they had everything backfire on them, and there would be no reason to die for a lie. If they were just lying, nobody dies for a lie. If I was lying about that and someone put a gun to my head and said, hey, we're going to kill you, it's like, okay, I'm making it up. I admit it, I'm making it up. I just wanted to make a good story. I wanted to get popular. But they didn't. They went to the grave for what they believed. Not only that, but they lived it. They spent the rest of their life loving people. It wasn't like they were sitting in palaces, rich, with all this money and looking down on all these poor people that they had deceived. No, they were out there serving the poor. They were out there doing miracles. They were out there living the gospel of Jesus and having the power to do that because he was alive.
Right. So this is what I was thinking about. Saying, wait a minute, if I was Pontius Pilate and I knew Jesus was going to rise from the dead, because I had all these Jewish, rabbis and all these officials saying, no, we got to crucify him, we got to kill him, and you got to put guards in there, and you got to seal the tomb, and make sure that he doesn't rise on the third day.
Right.
So you can imagine they didn't sleep. Are you kidding? I was in the military. You better not be sleeping. You stay up.
That's right.
And don't worry, you got the first sergeant coming around checking to see if you're up too. You don't know who's there checking. So he has the light. The flash of light scares the heck out of the soldiers. They report back to Pontius Pilate saying, "You're not going to believe what happened." Now think of this, Brian. This is the thing. Pontius Pilate said, "What? This happened. He's gone. We ran away. We freaked out." So of course the Pharisees, Sadducees, whoever they were, they say, well, we can't let this get out. You have to find the body. So they go searching for the body, and obviously they can't find it. So what do you think happened to the guards?
Well,
that's the point.
In the Bible, yeah, exactly. In Bible stories, the Jewish people told the guards to say, hey, go to Pilate and tell him that you fell asleep. And if word gets to him, then, hey, we'll pay him off and we'll take care of it for you.
Oh,
now,
I think it gets much cruder than that, Brian.
Oh, absolutely.
I will say this, that he had all the guards put to death. Because what are guards? Nothing to him, just to make sure the rumor, you can't risk the thing of the rumor getting out.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
I do.
That's why it could never, you can't read any material saying it was validated by any of the guards about his resurrection. Why? Because they no longer existed. Unless you read, I never read anything about it. I never even heard about that. But I was thinking about that. I said, well, that's what you do to squash a rumor. Well, which they're trying to propose a rumor, not fully realizing that, hey, look, we had all these guards there, the tomb was broken. Who rolled the stone back? Even if they were sleeping, that makes a lot of noise. I mean, if they can move the rock, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's an interesting concept, So then he does rise from the dead. And, of course, the Shroud of Turin is he left behind. That's our explanation as to what happened, the risen Christ. Of course, we know that scientists debunked it, back in the 70s when they did this major test, but the test was relied on a tainted corner of the shroud that was repaired in the 14th century, where they had weaved with the old and the new in the repair work, so that when they tested it, it came up like a 13th, 14th century relic of cloth, and it can't be Jesus, because that was 2,000 years ago.
Right.
So, but I find there's a couple things that I stumbled across. We know that in Lanceloti, Italy, there was a miracle of the Eucharist with, where the host turned to actually living flesh. This is 1,200 years ago, I remind you. And then the petrified blood, they broke off a piece because it was hard, it's like a rock, found that it was living blood type AB. In 1996, they did the same thing at Buenos Aires, where a host turned into a bleeding host, it turned into flesh, and then the wine turned into blood, and they took the host and they put that. I shouldn't say the wine turned into blood, but it does anyway, super naturally. But the host was put into pure water for a month. And then distilled water, I think, for some 3 months, and it grew, and it was bleeding. And then they took that, gave it to a big doctor, big name in New York City, who analyzed it and said, I can tell you exactly what this is, a living heart, from the living part of the heart itself, the muscle of the heart that actually gives the heart the beat and the life. And then they compared it. He says this comes from a living heart. And it was already 3 years past when it's already converted into the act of flesh and blood of Jesus Christ. So they took the sample from Buenos Aires, 1996, compared it to the information he had 1,200 years ago in Italy. They both concluded that both came from a living heart of the same person, and in Jerusalem they said it came, and then in Italy they said it came from the area around Jerusalem.
Right.
Now the last thing I read about, doubting Thomas over here, I said, well, wait about the Shroud of Turin. And I read an article about that, and they did take a sample of the blood type AB. So all three are connected. They say not only is it blood, it's human blood, because it's DNA. So what do you think happened? They tried to trace the DNA. What do you think that got them? I am. That's where I got them.
More
they can't do
more
it.
Conclusive evidence.
No, because it's the beginning. So there's nothing before it. It is. I am. Is that interesting?
Very interesting.
It's fascinating. And then, of course, we have all the miracles that occur and will be occurring around the world to try to bring us back.
Right. Exactly.
So I just think that part of it's pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of the Eucharistic miracles are absolutely fascinating, and a lot of them are scientifically verified. A lot of them have been written up by journalists who aren't even Christian, who aren't even Catholic. It's a very neutral account from skeptics, and they all seem to say that it's miraculous. Even scientists. I mean, a lot of this is scientifically proven, because some people will say, well, I don't believe it unless science can prove it. Well, science has spoken in favor of it many times, and it's really hard to deny.
Oh, no, they have proven it. Not only that, but the key scientists that worked on the Shroud of Turin back in the 70s, this young couple said it was a married couple, probably in their 50s, I would say. They said, that can't be. That can't be. So they're the ones that discovered that the weave was taken from a repaired section of the Shroud of Turin, and that would taint the experiment. Well, this one final scientist who was the head of the whole thing said he wouldn't listen to it. He said, they're just lay people. They don't know what they're talking about. But they kept pursuing. And he had a piece of the fiber still left over from the original experiment. And upon his deathbed, basically, as he was dying from cancer, not only did he conclude that it was interweaved and it was a bad sample, but he also converted to Catholicism because he says, truly, this is the cloth of Jesus Christ. Wow. Isn't that amazing? And the guy that did the experiments in New York City, he didn't do just Buenos Aires experiment. He did a few of the other ones. Who was a staunch atheist, converted to Catholicism also.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And how many times that happens, too. I mean, like I think we talked about last week or the week before about Lourdes, the town in France where the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared and all the miracles that happened there. And I think I mentioned the atheist journalist who went there to disprove it, and they ended up converting to Catholicism once they saw miracles right in front of their eyes that they couldn't deny.
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating. So there's a couple things I stumbled across today in my ventures here, and it's one about it's a home. What is this? Home inspiration, life after death. The angels who took her home. So this is an article, and it says right here: the angels who took her home. He was afraid of death, fearful of the idea of losing any of his loved ones. But when his mother became terminally ill, he experienced a sight that brought him deep and profound comfort. This is by a guy by the name of Scott Euthyphrom. It's UNRUH, capital FROM. And I guess it's from Angels on Earth, posted June 15th last year, 2016. He goes on, my mom and dad had known each other since high school. Quote, we were meant to be together, end of quote, Dad said. My father didn't show his emotions much, but you could see a sparkle in his eyes whenever he talked about Mom. My older brother, Roland, and sister, Alma, and I always knew how much our parents loved each other. Long after they sent us kids off to bed, they lingered at the kitchen table, talking and holding hands, just enjoying their time alone. We lived in Midland, Texas, where Dad was a full-time CPA, and Mom had her own real estate business. In 1980, they bought 600 acres of land a few miles up from town. I'm just thinking to myself, laughing, that's a lot of acreage. What would that cost us up here?
Yeah.
600 acres. All right, a few miles from town, the fulfillment of my mother's dream. Quote, I want my grandchildren to run and play on their own land, end of quote, she said. Just like I did when I was a girl. From a small start, the ranch grew to 5,000 acres. And they eventually built up a herd of 200 cattle. Dad hired 3 ranch hands to help my brother and me run the place. But no matter how busy they were with their job and the ranch, my parents had lunch together every day for nearly 45 years. Often some creative dish Mom made with ingredients from her vegetable garden. Could you imagine these two? I just can imagine. They remind me of grandparents, you know. It says, quote, "Your mother could whip up a meal for 50 people in 5 minutes," Dad said. Even after Roland and Alma had families of their own, we'd gather at our Midland home on Sunday evenings for Mom's barbecued steak and hand-cut French fries and the best homemade ice cream in the world. I would come back from the ranch, where I lived in a trailer off and on, and we'd be together around the kitchen table, laughing and enjoying good food, just like always. Mom was the meaning of home for us, especially for my dad. Then one summer day in 1994, Mom had a stroke. She was rushed to the hospital, and later, while she was recovering, the doctors had even worse news. Mom had cancer. Quote, it can't be true," end of quote, Dad whispered. Quote, "She's the strong one," end of quote. The look in his eyes was so sad I had to turn away. God, help my family, I prayed. I didn't want to think about anybody dying, not my mom or my dad or somebody, even me. For a while I looked after the ranch while Dad took care of Mom at home. But by fall, she was back in the hospital with only an IV keeping her alive. On Wednesday, the 2nd of November, I was in town watching over Mom and Dad and my sister. We'd call Roland to hurry back from the ranch. The situation was serious. I hoped he would make it in time. Dad brushed Mom's hair back from her damp forehead, holding her hand and talking to her, just like their nights together at the kitchen table. But she couldn't answer him anymore. Who could be there for him when she is gone? Who would be there for any of us? Home wouldn't seem like home anymore. As I was overcome with sadness. Boy, this is true to earth, huh?
Yeah.
The real deal here. It's getting me emotional. Roland joined Alma and Dad and me in Mom's room. Nobody had to say a word. Mom struggled for each swallow breath. The nurse tried to make her comfortable. I stood beside the bed, touching my mother's feet. My father was standing next to me, my brother and sister on the other side of the bed. For some reason, I looked at my watch, 9:56 p.m. Why is the room so bright? I wondered. Looking up, I saw it wasn't the fluorescent lamp overhead. Beams of light descended into the room. The room was filled with light, and 2 fingers emerged from the brightness. They were massive, towering over my father, who was taller than anyone I knew. No one seemed to notice them but me. Angels, I wanted to shout, but I was afraid to say anything. I knew it would make everyone cry. The fingers embraced my dad and looked at my mom. I watched the pain leave her face as she took her last breath. And when I looked at my father, I saw that he was being supported by wings of light. The angels would hold him up. And they would hold up my whole family, I decided. There was strength enough for all of us. I wasn't sad anymore. As God puts us arranged, as it seems, I couldn't stop smiling. I had no more troubling thoughts about death. My mother was at peace, and one day we will know that peace too. One day we'll be in our heavenly home together again with Mom, who gave us our earthly home such meaning. How beautiful is that?
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah, they said the angels are huge. They're big creatures, and yet God puts us above the angels.
Yeah, well, they're certainly not little cherubs like we see in all the pictures, that's for sure.
Yeah, I know, just the little babies taking it like that, huh?
Yeah, right.
That's what I like to think of, all the little ones, But and it's true, when you really think about it, we're going to be joined together. Now, if we're going to be joined together, don't you think that we want to be good? Try to get on the right path? And we do stumble. There's no doubt about it. I don't know if anybody doesn't, And like I said about my buddy who just recently had a stroke, it's like, what? I mean, it could happen at any time,
Right.
And you just keep it in prayer, and he could be taken at any time, Amazing. So what's your thoughts?
It's scary, actually. It should really make us think about our lives, about where we're at, where we're going, if we're on the path to heaven or not. I always ask the kids, and adults even, at my retreats, my parish missions, I say, if you died tonight and you met God, would you be ready? If you died tonight, would God say that you've been living for Him? And could you tell God that you've been living for Him? Have you been praying? Have you been going to church? Have you confessed your sins and gotten right with God? If you died tonight, would it be a surprise where you're going to go, or would you be ready and know where you're going to go? And I really get kids and adults to think about topics that aren't spoken of very often, and that is our eternal salvation, which is the most important topic we could ever think of. I mean, that's our ultimate goal. That's our ultimate goal. I mean, if we get everything else on earth, but we don't make it to heaven, then what good is it? What have we gained?
What good is it? Yeah, you gain nothing. It's like building the silos. Oh, I'm going to have a good retirement. I'm going to build these big silos, which really represent all the gold, all the wealth you could possibly have. What good is it if you're going to be taken that night?
Right, and Jesus didn't warn us for nothing. I know it's very popular today to kind of canonize everybody and think that everybody goes to heaven, and it's a really nice thought, but that's not the reality. Jesus said hell exists, and Jesus said that people who don't follow Him and reject Him, have chosen freely to reject Him for eternity. And one of the things that bugs me is when I go to funerals, I understand they need to be kind and they need to be compassionate, but they basically canonize all the people who have died. I mean, every funeral I go to, they're like, well, this person is in heaven now, or they're watching over us. Or we can call this person Saint so-and-so.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
For one, and it has a double effect of negativity, because number one, it's probably not true. We don't know that. And they could be in purgatory. We could be praying for them, but since we think they're in heaven, we're not praying for them. But number two, even worse, a lot of people don't live their faith. They don't follow Jesus. We know that they're not church people, and we know they've lived a risque life, and yet the priests are basically saying that they're in heaven. What is the message that sends us? That we don't need to do anything to get to heaven, because everybody goes no matter how bad you are. So there's no need to reform your life. There's no need to fix it. There's no need to get on the right track or, repent. And the bottom line of all this is that Jesus says differently, is that we need to live for Him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's what He says for us.
Exactly. No, that's exactly true. I mean, I don't know. How old are you anyways, Bryan?
I am 43, but most people say I look about 25.
There you go. Well, no, because you're a lot younger than me. And I don't think you recall the fire and brimstone when I used to go to church.
I was at the tail end of that.
Okay, so you experienced that. So, but like we were raised with that,
I went to school with the nuns.
Oh, okay. So you heard it.
Yep.
No, you heard it. But the kids don't get that today. That's the important part. They don't get that today.
No, they get the opposite a lot of times. If you just play patty cake and you're a good person, you'll get to heaven. Everybody gets to heaven.
I like the analogy, patty cake. That's funny. Yeah, you're right. And people have to really think about that. I do constantly, even when I'm sitting in the middle of a sin. I'll say, why did I do that? Oh, God, I don't know. Not easy. And here we are called to this type of ministry, yet, it's not like we wear halos. That's what I think people get confused about. We're just normal people trying to make our life meaningful. But we do have one thing that I think an advantage over others. We know what's at the other end, and we're trying to get there. And people who don't try, they don't try because they don't want to change their life.
Correct.
And my nephew just made his confirmation, and I wrote in a card. Remember two things. First, no God equals no life. Number two, there will be more people trying to tear you away from God than trying to help you to get to Him. Those are those are just facts of life.
Right.
And our job is to get everybody back. Because, I had a couple experiences. Somebody said that one day, if you just say, Our Father, like in the Our Father, the prayer,
right.
You just don't, all you have to say is these two words, Our Father. And just mean it and repeat it. So I did that. I went to the church in front of the tabernacle, and I kept repeating, Our Father, Our Father. Do you know that I was kind of lifted up, and I was put at such peace? It was beautiful. Because why? Now, and I'm thinking, was it because of the words, or was it because I just sat there, shut my mouth, just saying, I'm thinking to myself, Our Father, Our Father, Our Father, without talking, trying to listen.
Right.
And listening, what came to me was the peace. He spoke very loudly that way. It's like the whisper. It's not the shout.
Well, see, that's the thing I think people don't understand. I think, number one, they think that people have an impression, still from the olden days, that God's really mean. God's angry. God's out to get you. But that's actually not true. God, we sinned against Him 1,000 times. We sinned against Him 10,000 times. And what did He do? He came down and died for us. He had every right to get rid of us or wipe us out or teach us a lesson, but He actually came and died for us so we could get to heaven. And so a lot of people are searching for peace. They're searching for happiness. They're searching for love. They're searching for an answer to their brokenness, their depression, their everything. And really, Jesus Christ is called the Prince of Peace because He came, as He said, into the world to give us peace and to give us joy and to give us joy abundantly. And so, when we follow Jesus, it's not about following a bunch of rules or checking a bunch of boxes, and going X, Y, and Z just to please God. It's about having a life-transforming relationship with God that'll heal us, help us, and give us the peace and fulfillment in this life that we're truly looking for, which really is a foreshadowing to the peace and fulfillment and love and everything that we truly desire in heaven.
Yeah, and not only that, but, I was just, as you were saying that, what came to me was He makes us aware of what's going on. Where are we situated in the world today? Where are we spiritually? He's God the Father. He's our Father. We have a biological Father, and we have a spiritual Father. And so thinking about the Father and what goes on with even the wars and stuff, I tell you something, I cried. I could see why God, what He experienced. What would happen if you saw your own kids going through some of what's happening?
Right.
Especially with the women being abused, with the wars going on, people shooting, young kids that are with ISIS, they're kidnapped. They're forced into being in the military. These are 10 years old, 11 years old, carrying AK-47s and carrying grenades and becoming living bombs, running up to blow up themselves up. They have no clue what that's all about. No,
they don't. And I was actually listening to some conversion stories at the gym recently. I always listen to good talks at the gym a lot of times, and I was listening to multiple conversion stories from Muslims, people who converted from Islam to Christianity. Even terrorists who hated Christianity, they actually found Jesus either in their jail cell or either wounded while they were healing. In different places they found Jesus, and they all said that Jesus gave them the one thing that they've never had, and that is absolute, complete peace. They've never had peace before. And mercy and forgiveness, as one Muslim said, mercy and forgiveness are Allah's to give, but He's not going to give them till the end of the world. So the fact that he felt this overwhelming forgiveness and mercy, which just made him bow to the floor in complete humility and just cry and cry and cry because he didn't think he deserved all this forgiveness and love. They experienced on earth what everybody should experience, what God wants everyone to experience, and that is His power, the power of His mercy, the power of His love, the power of His healing, and the power of His fatherly hand to bring us back to Him. That's what our faith is all about. And I can tell you countless Muslims and other religions who have found peace in Jesus Christ, all the answers to their questions that they're looking for, all the desires for fulfillment in life, all found in the moment they met Jesus.
Exactly. And I heard from, I can't think of the source, that he's appearing even with ISIS to the soldiers, the comrades over there, appearing to bring him back. I mean, okay, so if I put myself in a position of Jesus, God the Father, what would I do to get my children back? Man, I would do everything. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I heard of a story about Hamas, the terrorist group. The person who was in charge of that terrorist group, his son converted to Christianity some years ago. And I heard his whole story, and it was amazing. And when his father heard about it, he's like, no, that's just, an American lie. It's a West lie. He never converted to Christianity, and he refused to believe any and all stories until they actually showed him the documentary interview with his son. And then, Muslims sometimes say the craziest things, but he's like, oh, well, they forced him to convert. They got him drunk, and then he converted. And, he would never have done that in his right mind. Well, okay, now he is in his right mind. If he really was forced to do it, he would just convert back. But the fact is, this guy found Jesus, and he's never been happier.
And you bring up a very important part, the propaganda. And, when people say, oh, they did this to him or they did that to them. Now, there is some truth where that does occur, where they do convert it. But when it comes to, like with Jesus, that to believe that they were converted because of that, he doesn't do that. He can't, Bryan, he can't do that. You know why he can't do that? Jesus can't force you to turn to him because you have free will.
Correct.
It has to be your free will to turn to him. That's why this world's in such a mess, because God has allowed Satan to test his people. And that's according to Pope Leo XIII. And not only that, Our Lady affirms it in Medjugorje, Yugoslavia, where she's still appearing. She says to the children, you must realize, children, that this century is under control of Satan, who's testing God's people. That's why we have wars, destruction, and all the other sexual misconducts that occur around the world. So it's there.
What's one interesting point is that a lot of Muslims, maybe even perhaps most Muslims, don't believe in free will. There's a lot of Muslims who actually believe that everything that happens is God's will. Whether you fall down the stairs, or whether you win a boxing fight or lose a boxing fight, or whether you trip going down the street, everything is Allah's will. So that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, but it's the biggest lie too, because we were never created to die. It was because of the sin of Adam and Eve, that brought death upon us. We were never. It makes it an interesting point, though. And since I said, this is what I do. I try to contemplate, what happens years ago. So Adam and Eve are created, right? How long did they live before they bit that apple? Did it happen a day, 2 days, a week, a month, years? It could have been
5 minutes.
3,000 years. It could have been thousands of, how many times have you heard in the Bible people living over 100, 150, 160 years?
Right.
Isn't that true?
Well, there's many different interpretations of that. We're not exactly sure what it means. I mean, it's possible that it's literal and they did live hundreds of years. Or, as you'll notice in the Bible, the pattern that the more they sin, the less time that they lived. So it could be a correlation to showing us that the more we sin, the more it kills us and that sort of thing. So it could be symbolic. We just don't know fully.
Yeah. And for some reason I had this thought, what we face now is eternity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, where are we going to be for eternity? Now, first of all, there's no eternity if you don't believe there's life after death, and there is life after death. I can assure you that. So, what is eternity? So, you know how you get a description of eternity, Brian?
How?
Put yourself in the closet and turn the light off in the middle of the night. What do you see?
Nothing.
How long is it? you see what I'm saying?
Right.
It goes forever. Somebody once said something to me just recently about the stars. How many stars are there in the sky? And the guy replied, I don't know, it was spiritual answers to that, but they says as many grains there are in the beaches in the world.
Wow.
Is that?
And maybe more, probably more.
It probably more because, it's endless. You'll never get to where you're supposed to get unless you're with God. Then you would probably have... I'm curious about when I get up, and I pray that I'm in good graces and I get to heaven because I get a lot of questions for them. What happened to all these people?
Right.
Isn't that... there's so many questions, unanswered questions I have.
And unfortunately, some people, we're approaching Halloween now, and unfortunately, a lot of people approach, the subject of death, and they want to know what happened to their loved ones. But instead of doing it God's way, they go to psychics, and they go to fortune tellers, they go to palm readers, they go to tarot cards, they go to seances, they go to all of these things that the Bible condemns because they're very dangerous to our souls, and they open up dark realms that should be left shut. And God can lead us to heaven, and we can trust Him. And that's really another reason why God doesn't permit these things is because He's our Father, and He wants us to trust Him. But we can't do that while we're going to all of these false things that don't even tell us the truth in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you bring up an interesting thing with these seances and the Ouija board and all stuff like that. We are never, ever to play with that stuff. It's demonic. And you never surrender your soul up. You don't give it up to anybody. You hang on to your soul. And by being hypnotized and stuff, that you're giving that up to be influenced. That's very dangerous.
Absolutely.
And it just says like in the healing ministry, because, we study that. We're part of the healing ministry. And it says in there, you never approach a person who you think is of evil thoughts or evil demonic ways, let's put it, alone. You always bring somebody else with you. Because if alone, the demonics can jump into you and you may come home with them.
Well, every exorcist... Sorry, continue. I was just going to say, every exorcist says to stay away from these things because these things open up gateways to the side, which can lead to demonic possession or obsession or oppression, different types of demonic attacks in our lives. And they have to go through deliverances or worse after they've experienced this stuff. And some people get into it unwillingly, but Padre Pio says the devil's like a rabid dog tied to a chain. As long as you don't get in his striking distance, he can't harm you because Christ is in you. However, when we get into this occult sort of stuff that we're talking about, that's how we put ourselves in his striking distance, and that's what is a danger to our soul and to our future.
Right. And some of these, like, what are some of these games that kids play today that are not good either?
You mean like a Ouija board?
Yeah, no, these are the computerized games. Like Dungeons and Dragons, I think is one of them.
Yeah, that's an older game, but that's a bad game.
That's a bad game, and there's a couple of other ones that I think that can.
people always told me that Dungeons and Dragons was bad, and I never really believed them. I mean, it's just a video game. How bad can it be? But then an ex-Catholic who became a Satanist, and then she became a Catholic again, actually told me that the music they use in that game was used in actually like black masses and witch covens. And it's the exact music that they use in that satanic stuff and in that video game. And that was the proof in the pudding.
Yeah, I heard years ago that some of the songs that they play are demonic. Not that you would recognize it as such, but if you played it backwards, it's worshiping the devil. Isn't that?
Sure.
That's fascinating. And I
Sure.
heard a little bit about it. I've experienced that with Father Ralph DiOrio, what the screams of the devil sound like. And I can tell you something. They're not of this earth. They're not of this earth. They are so loud, they're horrific. They are horrific. You know, and I saw like a vision of hell, and it reminded me of, a big pot of stew. You know, when you have all your potatoes in your meat and all that, and it's bubbling up, and the potatoes come up to the top, then the meat and all that bubbling along. Well, I saw a vision of hell with bodies doing the same thing, all in blood, bubbling away, just like that. Yeah. Oh.
Well, that's why Jesus came to save us, isn't it? He came to save us from hell. He came to save us from the devil. He came to save us from, and I've seen some demonic stuff in my life, and I'm so glad that I'm in the light. And here's the thing. Right. There is light and there is darkness. There is good and there is evil. And I was teaching this at my Bible study the other day, but that, when you ask people to come to church, when you kind of like that person you were talking about earlier, who I offered to give her my book, but you ask them about God or to come to church or just think about it, and they get so angry and they get hostile against the faith. And a lot of people who are living in darkness want nothing to do with the light. And so I challenged my Bible study to think about their lives and why we want to have so much to do with the darkness. The darkness hates the light, and yet secretly we love the darkness a lot of times as Christians in our addictions, in our sins, and we don't want to give it up. And yet Christ is the light, and he's calling us to have no compromise with that and to be fully his and to be fully on the path to heaven. And so I challenge Catholics to live holy without compromise. That's what Christ calls us to do. And to look at their life and to look at the contradiction, those things that are like our music. I'm not saying throw away all your music, and I'm not saying throw away all your movies, but there's certainly a lot of movies that we watch that are against Christ, and there's some music that we may listen to that's against Christ. And so you start there and say, you know what, these 5 movies, they're not for God. They're against God. I'm going to get rid of them because I love God so much more. And that's when we start to purify our life, and God can fill us so much more with his grace.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly true. And it's, I went into prayer once. I said, Lord, why don't you, when you keep me, because we all experience like when we're really close to God, when you're close to God. I said, why can't you keep me there? So you know what he told me, put in my heart? He says, if I kept you there, you wouldn't know me. And I says, I wouldn't know you. And then it dawned on me. My soul, my humanity is so weak that he allows sin to come into my life so that I can turn back to God and say, hey, look, hello, Tony, I'm here. Otherwise, I'd never turn to him.
Or conversely, you might realize, you kind of might think that it's all about you. Christ didn't do this. If you stay there long enough, you might start to think it's all about you, and you did this, and it leads to pride, and that's one of the big downfalls. Right. It's kind of what led the devil to his downfall.
Yeah. I mean, how often do we see these young singers, like Michael Jackson? How many died young? There's countless that died young because they had too much at the beginning. They weren't really spiritual, to the degree they probably should have been. I think the closest one that came close to that was Elvis Presley, But then he got caught up with the drugs and, most, they just self-destruction,
Yeah, Billy Joel even had a song back in the day which said, "Only the good die young." That was the name of the song. And it was actually a song that made fun of Catholics, and made fun of Catholic girls because they wouldn't have sex. And, he said, oh, they're just too busy counting on their rosaries. But I'd rather be counted with the sinners and have fun in my life. And, I'd rather be the one who dies young. And it's a total insult, not only to Jesus, but to Catholics themselves. So I actually stopped listening to Billy Joel for a really long time because it was completely insulting. And then I know he came out later with an apology, but I think that's the attitude of a lot of people.
Yeah, how many souls did young kids that he destroyed in the process? People have to think things through.
Oh, absolutely. These kids are like into drugs and drinking and partying, and I'm always challenging teens. Some kids, they're like, oh, I'm going to a party this weekend, and I'm like, oh, you're going to be good? They're like, maybe, probably, I don't know, we'll see. I'm like, that means no. If you don't have a firm resolution to stand up for your faith, if you don't have a firm resolution to stand up against, peer pressure, it's never going to happen. And then some of the teens are like, yeah, that's true. I need to be stronger.
Instead of but you have to start. I mean, you have this. It's a Bryan. You probably know just as well as I do. Now I'm 70 years old. Okay, I'm an old timer. And I feel like I'm young, but my body tells me sometimes I'm not that young. And I always have to constantly remind myself to pray. And even in the car, instead of listening to a radio, I put on either, I have a CD with the rosary on, and that's a good place to start for those listeners that don't know how to start. Pick up a CD with the rosary and the Divine Mercy on it. The Divine Mercy you can get up from Massachusetts at Stockbridge, Massachusetts.
Or online.
Order a CD or online, yep. And you don't have to do anything. Just play it. Play it on your radio instead of listening to this some of the times the junky music we listen to.
Nowadays you can get the Bible on CD too, or the Bible on MP3, and you can listen to that in your car. I know some of my friends do that.
There you go. Yeah. I haven't done that yet. I should do that. I think I know I have I don't know what I have.
They always say that us Catholics need to learn the Bible, so this is a good way to learn the Bible.
Yeah, I know. Hey, getting back to a lot of these singers and stuff, I've heard more than once that they sell themselves to the devil so they can get all the money. Yeah. Isn't that sad?
Yeah, there's a documentary I saw called Hell's Bells, and it was a 2-tape or 2 DVD set. And it actually shows a lot of the things in the music that you would never know. People who gave themselves to the devil, people who practice voodoo outright, and they make no bones about it. And a lot of times I think we ignore that, because, we like the music or we like the movies. We don't want to get rid of it out of our lives, which is another way of saying we don't want to get rid of sin out of our lives. We're not ready to commit to God, and yet God has no equal. He makes no bones about it that we have to choose a side. It's either him or bust. There is no middle ground. Middle ground is hell. Middle ground is the devil's ground. And so he makes us have a choice for him. And that's what I want to challenge our listeners to do, is to choose Christ and to work in slowly, baby steps in purifying their life and coming closer to him.
Exactly. And you have to take it slow because when I first got into this, and it was back in the 80s, where I really became with the charismatic renewal, in those early years, probably in the late 70s too, that's when I started getting rooted in this. And you can get overwhelmed with the truth that you can learn in the search. So you really have to take baby steps at first. And the best way is I tell people, I don't think that you should agree with me or anything. Just prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Prove me. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell both of us where we're wrrong.
Absolutely.
Try and prove it.
Absolutely.
Scott Hahn did that, right? Scott Hahn did that one. He said,
I always tell teenagers and adults, don't take, especially teens. When I speak to them, I'm like, don't just accept everything I say. I mean, it's right, but challenge me. If you have questions, ask. If you have doubts, if you have concerns, if stuff doesn't make sense, if it seems stupid, challenge it. Ask about it, because that's how we wrestle with our faith, and that's how we make it our own, and that's how we come to understand it more in a way that makes sense and it becomes interesting.
Yeah. And with that, Bryan, I'm going to have you conclude. I opened it up, and if you can conclude with a prayer, we'll be off in about 30 seconds.
All right, Lord Jesus, we just welcome you into our hearts. We welcome you into every airwave and every person who's hearing this radio show right now. And we ask that you bless them, keep them, and lead them closer to you for eternity. Help us in our weakness. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. And Bryan, we'll be in touch.
All right. God bless.
God bless. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.